This is Garis, Masculist MGTOW flyers, that is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo Garis. This is flyer number 494, part 2, entitled Masculists are angrier at women than feminists are at men. Continuing straight on. The Masculists propose a CMT, that's Career Mother Timeline, for women to overcome this problem. For example, for intelligent women of the upper middle class, they get their master's degree in a career competent field by age 23. Then work in that field for 5 years, building up experience and competence. During that time she finds her husband and has her first kid by age 29. And her second by age 31. 4 years later, her second kid is off to kindergarten, so she goes back to work. For the 6 years she has been looking after small children, she is given a government-paid maternity wage to alleviate the burden on the husband/father of being the sole breadwinner. Masculists have an even greater hatred of fluffy feminists. It is bad enough that they are fluffies and hence hated manslavers. But they're also hypocrites and worse, indirect genociders, since they have taken over the divorce courts and made them so toxic for men that in many Western countries 2/3 of young men now reject marriage and paternity, spending their money on themselves, living the MGTOW, that's men going their own way, lifestyle. This cannot continue, since we will wipe ourselves out due to the crashing birth rate. These truly hated fluffy feminists who control the divorce courts are seen by the Masculists as hypocrites, since these feminists want equal rights with men in the parliaments, but reject equal obligations with men to share equally the burden of earning the living by bothering to get career competent educations at high school and college. So expect to be feminists in the parliaments, but fluffy manslaving parasites in the divorce courts, seeing divorcing fathers as cash machines to be robbed and abused. Masculists have a real visceral hatred of such women and publicly spit in their faces when the opportunity arrives. But things are worse than this, and that is that these fluffy feminists who control the divorce courts are indirect genociders, since they have made divorce so toxic for men that they have generated an ever-growing MGTOW movement of men who refuse to marry and reject paternity, thus wiping out the population. These MGTOWs are merely reacting to the toxicity of the divorce courts. So the root cause of the birth rate crash is the toxicity of divorce for men, who not surprisingly decide to reject marriage and paternity as such a shitty deal for men that they utterly reject it. Masculists tell young women that the root cause of their babylessness, that is, having boyfriend after boyfriend refusing to give her his sperm, is that these men refuse to become fathers through fear and hatred of the fluffy feminist-controlled divorce courts. So Masculists tell these babyless young women that they need to vote with men for the men-fairing of the gender laws. For example, thoroughly reforming the divorce courts so that they are fair to men. Legislating the that's paternity rejection right. Setting up gender equality committees in the parliaments, consisting half of female feminists and half of male masculists, so that the gender issues of both sexes are dealt with equally, which is far from being true today. For 99.9% of people, if you use the term gender equality, they will unconsciously think of feminism, women's rights, since that is all they have ever heard over the past 6 decades. That is a monoconscious feminist spiel that gender oppression is a one-way street, when the Masculists and MGTOWs know all too well that gender oppression is a two-way street, and that in fact women oppress men far worse with their many decades-lasting gender crimes against men, the worst being their decades-lasting manslavery of men, their paternity fraud, their pill lying, their utterly hypocritical opposition to the legislation of the given that women already have the maternity rejection right, commonly known as the abortion right. The fluffy feminists who control the divorce courts are indirectly wiping out whole populations, so have to be stopped. When the very survival of a people is deeply threatened, they often go to war to stop that happening. So in the limit, if these hated fluffy feminists continue doing what they're doing, the responsible males, masculist soldiers, will simply go into the streets and shoot them in a sex war to stop whole populations from dwindling away to zero. Then masculist laws will be implemented and fluffy feminists will be pushed brutally to one side for having caused the near annihilation of the population. We masculists are fed up with hearing the monoconsciousness of the typical MFB, that's monoconscious feminazi bigot, who has been utterly brainwashed all her young life that gender oppression is a one-way street. So she is angry at men for the ways that men oppress women, which is what monoconscious feminism teaches her. These MFBs know nothing about masculism, so by definition are monoconscious. Monoconscious feminists tend to be rather feminazi bitchy because they are angry at men for the ways that men oppress women, for example, rape, sexual harassment, domestic violence, patriarchy, etc. But since they know nothing about masculism, they don't have their monoconscious feminist anger at men cancelled by a masculist anger at women for the ways that women oppress men, and in fact far worse than vice versa, since women's oppression of men lasts decades in many cases. So masculists have little patience with MFBs and attack them verbally with masculist ideas, masculist rhetoric, blowing them out of the room, telling these MFBs in no uncertain terms how hated they are for their ignorant, bigoted, biased monoconsciousness, and that it is in their self-interest to become bi-conscious, since that way they're more likely to have a boyfriend or to keep one. Since if her male feminist boyfriend gets masculisted, making him bi-conscious, then the monoconscious bigotry of his feminist girlfriend will really get on his nerves and he will dump her. In light of all the above, it should be clear that masculists have more reason to be angry at women than vice versa, since women oppress men far worse. It's the task of the masculists to educate society that this is the case, which is one of the reasons why masculists like myself write masculist flyers like this one, to get the masculist word out, that gender oppression is a two-way street, and that women had better get used to being verbally, viciously attacked in public by very angry, hateful masculists if these women continue to act as MFBs. If they do, then masculists will bite their fucking heads off. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. Author of the book Masculism, Men's Rebellion Against Being Manslaves to Women, an e-textbook of 490 plus masculist flyers for men's studies courses, freely downloadable in Microsoft Word format from my website.